The silence hit first. Not the kind of quiet you get on a winter morning back home, but a deep, heavy silence that pressed against the ears like a physical weight. Outside the small observation window of the Odyssey 7, Mars hung in the blackness, rust-red, unmoving, indifferent. Inside, the air smelled stale, tinged with burnt plastic and something metallic. Oxygen levels were dropping. Everyone knew it. No one said it out loud. Just 3 days ago, everything had been normal. The crew of 6, 3 scientists, 2 engineers, and a mission commander, were halfway through their 6-month rotation on the joint European-Japanese research station orbiting Mars. They were studying dust storms, testing new life support systems, and sending data back to Earth. Routine, predictable, safe. Then came the strike. It wasn't loud. In space, nothing is. But the station shuddered like it had been punched. Alarms blared for exactly 7 seconds before the main power cut out. Emergency lights flickered on, casting long, nervous shadows. One of the engineers working outside on a solar array never made it back inside. The micrometeoroid, no bigger than a grain of rice, had torn through the hull near the oxygen recycler and sliced through the primary comms antenna like paper. Now, the station was bleeding air. Slowly but surely, the commander sealed off the damaged module, saving the rest of the crew, but the cost was high. 2 people were badly hurt. One with a punctured lung from flying debris, the other unconscious from oxygen deprivation. The remaining 4 worked in exhausted shifts, patching leaks with emergency foam, rerouting power through backup lines, and trying to keep the injured alive with limited medical supplies. Back on Earth, mission control had gone dark. No voice calls, no data streams, just static. The last signal they'd received was a garbled burst of telemetry that ended mid-sentence. Engineers in Darmstadt and Tsukuba ran simulations, checked orbits, sent emergency pings, but nothing came back. After 48 hours of silence, the worst was assumed. Rescue wasn't just unlikely, it was impossible. The nearest spacecraft was a cargo freighter near Earth, weeks away even at top speed. Mars was too far, too remote, too alone. Inside Odyssey 7, hope began to evaporate faster than the oxygen. They tried everything. Used the short-range radio to hail any passing satellite. Sent coded pulses through the backup laser comm. Even pointed a handheld signal mirror toward the sky, just in case a telescope on Earth happened to be watching. Nothing. The void swallowed every attempt. Food wasn't the problem. They had months' worth. Water was recycled efficiently, but air was running out. The backup CO2 scrubbers were failing. One by one, the crew started feeling it. Headaches, dizziness, shortness of breath. Sleep became restless. Tempers frayed. They spoke less, moved slower, conserved every breath like it was gold. At night, or what passed for night in the endless twilight of orbit, the commander recorded messages. Not official logs, personal ones. Voice notes to parents, siblings, children they might never see again. They kept them short, honest, sometimes just silence, followed by a shaky, "I love you." They stored the files on a hardened drive, hoping someone someday might recover it. One evening, as Mars filled the viewport like a dying ember, one of the engineers whispered, "Do you think they even know we're still alive?" No one answered. They didn't need to. The truth hung in the thinning air. Earth had moved on. Funerals were probably being planned. Memorials drafted. The world had already written their ending. They weren't angry. Just tired. Tired of fighting a battle no one could see. Tired of waiting for a miracle that physics said couldn't happen. By day 5, oxygen dropped below 14%. Breathing felt like sucking air through a wet cloth. The injured crew member with the lung wound slipped into a coma. The others took turns holding his hand, not because it helped, but because it reminded them they were still human, still connected, still here. They started preparing for the end. Not dramatically, no speeches, no grand gestures. Just practical things. Securing loose tools so they wouldn't float and cause damage after. Labeling medicine bottles. Writing final instructions on how to manually vent the station if systems failed completely. Small acts of dignity in the face of the inevitable. The commander sat alone in the command module, staring at the blank comms screen. For the 100th time, she pressed the transmit button even though she knew it wouldn't work. "This is Odyssey 7er. If anyone can hear this, we're still here." Only static answered. Cold, empty, final. She leaned her forehead against the console, closed her eyes, let the exhaustion pull her under for a few minutes. In that half-sleep she dreamed of rain, of wet grass, of breathing without thinking about it. When she woke, the oxygen alarm was beeping again. Lower threshold. 12.3%. Less than 48 hours left, maybe less if the scrubbers gave out completely. Outside, the stars didn't blink. Mars didn't care. The universe kept turning, indifferent to 6 lives clinging to a fragile bubble of metal and hope millions of kilometers from home. They gathered in the main module, not to say goodbye, but just to be together. Shared a packet of rehydrated fruit, the last treat they'd been saving, laughed weakly at an old joke, watched Earth rise over the Martian limb, a pale blue dot impossibly far away. No one cried. Not yet. There was a strange calm in accepting that this was it, that they'd done everything they could, that sometimes, despite all the training, all the technology, all the dreams of exploring the stars, space wins. They turned off non-essential systems to save power, dimmed the lights, sat in near darkness listening to each other breathe, the sound growing shallower with every hour. And then, just as the commander was about to suggest they initiate emergency hibernation, a last resort protocol that might stretch their oxygen a few more hours, though survival was near zero, something changed, a flicker on the backup radio panel. Not static, not noise. A pattern, a repeating signal, weak but clear, cutting through the cosmic hiss like a knife. Her heart hammered. She scrambled to the console, hands trembling, adjusted the frequency, boosted the gain, and there it was. A voice, tight beam, military-grade encryption, but unmistakably human. Odyssey 7N, this is an inbound vessel. Hold on, we're coming. ETA 36 hours, silence followed. Not the old silence, the heavy, hopeless kind, but a new kind. The kind that buzzes with disbelief. With fragile, trembling hope, one of the engineers whispered, "Is it real?" The commander played it again. And again. Same words, same tone. Not a glitch. Not a dream. She looked at her crew, pale faces, sunken eyes, lips cracked from dry air, and saw something she hadn't seen in days. Light. Not much, just a spark, but enough. She keyed the mic, voice raw but steady. "This is Odyssey 7er. We read you. We're holding on." Outside, the void remained dark, but for the first time in a week, it didn't feel empty anymore. Far from Mars, deep in the silent stretch between the orbits of Earth and Jupiter, a ship moved like a shadow. It wasn't built for science or exploration. It wasn't meant to be seen at all. Sleek, dark, and armored, it carried no logos, no national flags, just a series of coded markings only a few people on Earth would recognize. This was a military vessel, the first of its kind designed to operate beyond the moon. Its mission was classified: test new propulsion, monitor deep space activity, and stay hidden. The crew on board lived in a world of strict routines, encrypted comms, and quiet discipline. They weren't soldiers in the old sense, they were pilots, engineers, medics, but they trained like warriors. Every system had a backup. Every move had a purpose. They knew they were alone out here, and that if something went wrong, help wouldn't come. They had accepted that long before launch. Then, during a routine sweep of emergency frequencies, something strange popped up. Buried under layers of solar noise and cosmic static, a faint, repeating signal pulsed from the direction of Mars. It wasn't standard distress code. It was fragmented, weak, almost ghost-like, but it carried the digital fingerprint of a civilian deep space habitat. And it was repeating the same 3 letters over and over. O7D, Odyssey 7. The ship's commander stood in the dim glow of the comm station, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. He'd been in space long enough to know that signals like this didn't just appear. Someone was in trouble. Bad trouble, but answering it wasn't part of the plan. In fact, breaking radio silence could blow their entire mission and reveal capabilities Earth wasn't ready to share with the world. He called a quick meeting in the mess module, which doubled as a strategy room. Only 5 people gathered, small crew, tight quarters. They listened to the playback of the signal. Some thought it might be a glitch. Others wondered if it was a trap. Space was getting crowded, and not everyone played fair. But one of the younger engineers who'd grown up watching Mars mission live streams as a kid spoke up softly. If that's real, they're already out of time. The room went quiet. Everyone knew the math. At current oxygen consumption rates, a damaged station near Mars wouldn't last more than a few days after a major system failure, and the signal had been repeating for over 36 hours. That meant the crew was likely down to their last breaths. The commander paced the narrow aisle between the benches. He thought about the rules, the orders, the consequences of disobeying them. But he also thought about what it meant to be human, especially out here where the stars didn't care if you lived or died. If they ignored this, they'd carry that silence with them forever. Finally, he stopped, looked at his crew. We're going to Mars, no cheers, no dramatic music. Just a series of quick nods and the sound of boots hitting metal as everyone moved to their stations. Within minutes, the ship's engines flared to life. Not the gentle thrust of a science vessel, but a hard, focused burn that pushed everyone back into their seats. The ship wasn't built for comfort. It was built for speed, and now it was running a race against death. Inside the cockpit, the pilot adjusted their course with steady hands. The new trajectory would shave hours off their arrival time, but it meant pushing the ion drives beyond safety limits. Heat warnings blinked on the console. "We'll manage," the pilot said simply. In the engine room, two technicians worked side by side, rerouting coolant lines and bypassing safety locks. Sweat beaded on their foreheads, not from heat, but from tension. One of them muttered a prayer under his breath, something his grandmother used to say before storms back home. The other just kept tightening bolts, jaw set, eyes focused. The medic cleared out half the storage lockers to make room for stretchers and emergency oxygen tanks. She checked every seal on the trauma kit, every dose of medication. She'd trained for combat injuries, not space emergencies, but she knew the basics. Stop the bleeding, keep the airway open, buy time. That's all anyone could do out here. Back on the bridge, the commander stared at the star map. A red line now stretched from their current position to Mars, a line of hope drawn in real time. But he knew the risks. If they arrived too late, they'd be carrying bodies, not survivors. If their ship was damaged during the high-speed approach, they'd all be stranded. And if Earth found out they'd broken protocol, well, he'd deal with that later. Hours passed. The ship hummed with a new kind of energy. Not the quiet tension of a covert mission, but the urgent rhythm of a rescue. People spoke less, moved faster. Coffee went cold. Meals were skipped. Everyone was locked into the same thought. Hold on. Just hold on a little longer. As they crossed the asteroid belt, the ship dodged debris with sharp, precise maneuvers. No time for caution now. Every second counted. The crew worked in near silence, communicating with hand signals and quick taps on consoles. They'd trained together for years, and now that trust showed in every smooth handoff, every shared glance. One night, or what passed for night in the ship's dimmed lighting, the comms officer thought he heard something new in the signal from Odyssey 70. A voice, faint but clear. "We read you. We're holding on." He played it for the commander. They listened together in the quiet of the bridge. No one spoke for a full minute after it ended. Then the commander said, "Tell them we're coming faster." The message was sent short, secure, full of promise. And then they pushed harder. The ship groaned under the strain. Panels vibrated. Lights flickered. But it held. This vessel had been built for war, but today it was flying for something far older than conflict. Mercy. Inside, the crew didn't talk about glory or medals. They talked about home, about the smell of fresh bread, the sound of rain on rooftops, the way sunlight felt on skin after months in artificial light. They reminded each other why Earth was worth racing across the solar system for. And as Mars grew larger in the viewport, no longer a distant red dot, but a world with storms and canyons, and somewhere above it, 6 people fighting to stay alive. The crew of the dark ship did something rare in deep space, they hoped. Not the desperate kind of hope that clings to miracles, but the quiet, stubborn kind that says we're not giving up on you. Because out here, where the void stretches forever and silence is the default, the most powerful sound in the universe isn't an explosion or a siren. It's a human voice saying, "I'm coming." Back on the Odyssey 7 time had become something strange. Stretched thin, then snapping tight like a rubber band about to break. After that first message from the unknown ship, the crew didn't celebrate. They couldn't afford to. Hope was dangerous now. Too much of it could make you careless. So they held it gently like a bird with a broken wing and kept working. But something had shifted. The air still tasted stale. Their heads still ached from low oxygen and the injured crew member hadn't woken up. But they moved with a new kind of urgency. Not panic, purpose. They checked every seal again, tested the backup power cells, made sure the emergency oxygen masks were ready. One of them even wiped down the airlock controls with a damp cloth just in case. It wasn't about cleanliness, it was about readiness. About showing whoever was coming that they hadn't given up. Still, doubt crept in during the quiet moments. What if the signal was a mistake? What if the ship turned away? What if it crashed on approach? Space was full of what-ifs, and most of them ended badly. But every time someone started spiraling, another would say something small. "Pass me that wrench," or "You hear that?" The CO2 scrubbers humming again, just to bring them back to the present. Then, on the second day after the message, the radio crackled again. This time, the voice was clearer, calmer. Odyssey 7 this is inbound vessel. We are now 18 hours out. Prepare for docking. Conserve oxygen. Do not attempt EVA. The words landed like a lifeline thrown into stormy water. 18 hours. Less than a full day. They could last that long. They had to, but a new worry took root. Their station was damaged. The main airlock was warped from the micrometeoroid strike. Even if the rescue ship arrived, how would they get inside? They didn't have the tools or strength to cut through metal in zero-G while half-starved and oxygen-deprived. One of the engineers, the one who'd been quiet for days, suddenly sat up straight. "The service hatch," he said. "Behind Module C, it's small, but it's intact. If they can dock there." They checked the schematics on a flickering tablet. Yes, the service hatch led directly to a utility corridor, then to the main living area. It wasn't designed for human entry, but in an emergency, it could work. They cleared the path, moved storage bins, made sure nothing blocked the way. Every movement cost precious breath, but they didn't stop. As the hours passed, the crew took turns watching the viewport. Not that they'd see the ship coming, it would be too small, too dark against the stars. But watching gave them something to do besides count their heartbeats. One of them started humming an old folk song their grandfather used to sing. Softly at first, then louder when no one told them to stop. Another joined in, then another. Soon all four were singing, off-key, tired, but together. It wasn't about music. It was about reminding each other they were still alive, still human. Down in the medbay, the unconscious crew member stirred. Just a twitch of the fingers. But it was enough to make the medic cry, quiet tears that floated in little spheres before she wiped them away. "He heard us," she whispered. "He knows we're not alone." Back on the bridge, the commander kept replaying the rescue ship's last message. She studied the tone, the wording. Military, precise, no wasted words. That meant they were trained. Professional. Not some desperate freelancer in a patched-together pod. Real help. Organized. Capable. But she also knew space didn't care about training or courage. A single mistake, a misaligned thruster, a faulty seal, and everything could still end in silence. So she made a decision. She recorded a new message, not a goodbye this time, but instructions. She described the station's damage, the location of the service hatch, the status of each crew member, even the layout of the interior. She spoke slowly, clearly, like she was guiding someone through a dark house. "If we're not awake when you arrive, this is how you find us." She saved it to the emergency beacon, set to auto-transmit every 15 minutes. Then she turned off the recorder and leaned back, exhausted but calm. Outside, Mars turned slowly below them, its red surface streaked with dust storms. Earth was just a pale speck in the distance, so far away it looked like a star. But for the first time in days, the crew didn't feel abandoned. Someone was coming through that distance. Not in days or weeks, in hours. As the 12-hour mark approached, the oxygen level dipped to 10.8%. Breathing felt like dragging air through wet sand. Their vision blurred at the edges. But they stayed awake. They made a pact. No one sleeps until the ship is docked. They passed a water pouch around, sipping slowly. Shared a protein bar in 4 careful pieces. Talked about stupid things. What food they'd eat first back on Earth. Pizza, mangoes, fresh bread. What they'd do on their first day home. Walk barefoot on grass, hug their dog, sit in silence with no alarms beeping. Laughter came easier now. Not because the danger was gone, it wasn't. but because they weren't facing it alone anymore. Then, with just 6 hours to go, the radio came alive again. Not a message this time, a sound. The low, steady hum of an approaching engine, picked up by the station's external sensors. Faint but unmistakable, something big was out there, closing in. They gathered at the main viewport, pressing their faces to the cool glass. Still nothing visible. But the sensors didn't lie. The ship was real. It was coming, one of them whispered. "What if they can't get us out in time?" Another replied, "Then we'll meet them halfway." And in that moment they understood something deeper than survival. It wasn't just about being saved. It was about being seen. About knowing that even in the vast, uncaring dark of space, someone had looked up, heard their whisper, and roared back. The hours ticked down. 5, 4, 3. The hum grew louder in the sensors. The crew sat in a circle on the floor, backs against the wall, hands loosely linked. Not for warmth, for connection. For the simple, powerful truth that they were still together. And as the final hour began, they didn't speak. They just listened. To the creak of the station, the hiss of thinning air, and far away, growing stronger with every second, the sound of a ship tearing through the void. Coming for them. The first thing they saw wasn't the ship. It was the light. A sudden sharp flare against the black, like a match struck in a dark room. Then another. Then a steady blue-white glow as the rescue vessel fired its retro thrusters, slowing down from a speed no civilian craft could handle. It came in fast, smooth, and silent. No sound in space, but the sight of it was louder than any alarm. Through the cracked viewport of Odyssey 7, the crew watched it approach. It wasn't sleek like the science ships they knew. It was angular, armored, built for strength, not grace. No logos, no colors, just dark metal and purpose. It looked like something out of an old war movie. Except it was real, and it was here, and it was stopping right beside them. Then came the radio. Clear, calm, and close. "Odyssey 7 in, this is rescue vessel. We are in position. Do not move. We're coming in." Inside the station, 4 exhausted people exchanged glances. No cheers, no tears. Just a deep, shaky breath. The kind you take when you realize you might actually live. Outside, the rescue ship extended a docking arm, but it stopped short. Their sensors had already told them the main airlock was damaged. Instead, a small team in heavy-duty suits pushed off from their hull, tethered by thin cables that glowed faintly in the sunlight. They moved with practiced precision, carrying tools that looked more like construction gear than anything from a spaceship. Plasma cutters, magnetic clamps, reinforced sealant foam. One of them floated toward the service hatch the crew had prepped. A voice came over the short-range comm patched through the station's backup system. "We're cutting in. Stay back from the hatch. It'll get hot." Inside, the crew obeyed, retreating to the far end of the corridor. They heard it before they saw it. A high-pitched whine, then a shower of sparks visible through the small reinforced window on the hatch door. Metal groaned as the cutter sliced through the outer layer. Minutes later, a second cut, then a third. The rescue team worked fast, silently, like surgeons in zero gravity. Finally, the inner seal gave way. A rush of cold air hissed into the corridor as pressure equalized. The hatch swung open slowly, pushed from the outside. And there they were. 3 figures in dark suits, helmets reflecting the dim emergency lights. One held a medical kit. Another carried an oxygen rebreather. The third scanned the corridor with a handheld sensor, checking for hazards. "Who's in charge?" the lead rescuer asked, voice muffled but firm. The commander stepped forward, swaying slightly from weakness but standing tall. "We're all that's left awake," she said. 2 are down. 1's critical. No time for introductions. The medic moved past them, already pulling monitors from the kit. The others followed, moving with urgency but not panic. They'd trained for this. Not this exact scenario. No one trains for miracles, but for chaos, for damage, for saving lives in impossible places. The injured crew member was lifted onto a collapsible stretcher, stabilized with neck braces and oxygen lines. The second unconscious one was checked, given a shot of stimulant, and wrapped in a thermal blanket. Within 10 minutes, both were being guided, gently, carefully, through the narrow corridor toward the open hatch. The rescuers didn't speak much. Just short commands: "Hold here, watch the line, seal that vent." But their actions spoke volumes. Every move was deliberate. Every glance checked on the survivors. They weren't just doing a job, they were bringing people home. One of the rescuers paused near the commander. "You held them together," he said quietly. She shook her head. "We just didn't let go." He nodded, then handed her a small oxygen mask. "Breathe. You're safe now." As the last of the crew crossed into the rescue ship, they felt it, the subtle hum of artificial gravity. Not full Earth weight, but enough to pull their feet down to make walking possible again. It felt strange after weeks of floating, like the universe had finally remembered they had bones. Inside the rescue vessel, everything was clean, tight, and efficient. No luxury, just function. Bunks lined the walls, medical stations glowed with soft blue lights, and the air smelled faintly of ozone and antiseptic. It wasn't warm, but it was alive, full of power, pressure, and purpose. The medic checked each survivor, pulse, oxygen saturation, hydration, gave them warm fluids through straws, covered them in heated blankets. One of the rescued crew members, barely able to speak, whispered, "Thank you." The medic just squeezed their shoulder and said, "You did the hard part. We just showed up." Back on Odyssey 7N, the rescue team secured the station, shutting down non-essential systems, sealing the breach as best they could, and leaving a beacon to warn others. They didn't salvage anything. They weren't there for equipment. They were there for people. As the docking arm retracted and the hatch sealed shut, the rescue ship fired its thrusters again, gentler this time, pulling away from the broken station, leaving it to orbit Mars like a ghost. Inside, the survivors sat together on a bench wrapped in blankets, sipping warm broth. No one spoke for a long time. They just listened. To the steady hum of engines, the beep of medical monitors, the sound of breathing that didn't hurt anymore. One of them looked out the small observation port as Mars shrank behind them. "I thought I'd never see Earth again," they said, voice rough. Another leaned their head on their shoulder. "Now you will." The commander watched the rescue crew move about their ship, calm, focused, already planning the next leg of the journey. She wanted to ask 100 questions. Who are you? Why did you come? What happens now? But she didn't. She just said, "You didn't have to do this." The lead rescuer, taking off his helmet for the first time, looked at her with tired eyes. "Yeah," he said. "We did." And in that moment, it wasn't about flags or missions or secrets. It was about something older, deeper, something that didn't need words. Out in the endless dark, when everything else fails, the only thing that matters is whether someone is willing to turn toward the sound of a cry. And answer it. As the ship turned its nose toward home, engines burning steady and strong, the survivors closed their eyes not to sleep, but to feel it. The weight of gravity, the warmth of air, and the quiet certainty that they were no longer alone. The journey back to Earth took weeks, but it didn't feel long. Not like the days on Odyssey 7 where every hour stretched like taffy pulled thin by fear. This time moved with purpose. The rescue ship, still unnamed, still quiet, carried them through the void like a steady hand guiding a lost child home. Inside, life settled into a new rhythm. The injured slowly woke, weak but aware. The medics checked vitals, changed bandages, coaxed them to eat. The survivors, once running on fumes, began to sleep deeply. Real sleep, not the fitful dozing of people waiting to die. They talked more now, laughed sometimes, watched old movies on a small screen, played cards with bent space-worn decks. Small things, but they felt huge. No one asked the rescue crew about their mission. No one demanded answers. There was an unspoken understanding. They'd crossed a line to save lives, and that was enough. In return, the survivors offered quiet gratitude, helping with simple tasks, sharing stories from home, even fixing a broken coffee maker in the galley. It wasn't about repaying a debt. It was about saying, "We see you. We're with you too." When they finally entered Earth's orbit, the view through the window stole their breath all over again. Not Mars this time, red and distant, but Earth, blue, swirling with clouds, glowing with life. Rivers like veins, cities like clusters of fireflies, forests, deserts, oceans, all of it humming with the quiet miracle of being alive. Ground control hailed them the moment they crossed the threshold. Not with questions or protocols, but with voices thick with relief. "Welcome back," one controller said, and that was it. No fanfare. Just warmth. Just home. Landing was smooth. The ship touched down at a remote spaceport under a sky full of stars. Real stars, not the ones seen through layers of metal and fear. Medical teams waited on the tarmac, but they didn't rush. They gave space. Let the survivors step onto solid ground at their own pace. The first thing one of them did was kneel and press their palm to the soil. "Cold, damp, real," they cried then. Not from pain, but from the sheer weight of being back where rain falls and wind blows and you can take a breath without counting it. In the weeks that followed, the world wanted to know everything. News channels played the rescue footage on loop. Experts debated how a military ship had been so far out. Governments held closed-door meetings. But the survivors didn't speak much at first. They needed time to heal, to remember how to live without alarms in their heads. When they did talk, it wasn't about politics or technology. It was about the moment the radio crackled to life, about the sound of a plasma cutter slicing through metal, about the look in a stranger's eyes when they said, "You're safe now." Their words sparked something unexpected. Within months, representatives from every major spacefaring nation gathered at the United Nations. Not to argue over territory or resources, but to sign a new agreement, the Deep Space Rescue Accord. Its core rule was simple. Any vessel in distress, civilian or military from any country, must be helped if possible. No questions, no delays, just help. It wasn't perfect. Trust didn't come overnight. But it was a start. A promise written not in law alone, but in the memory of 6 people who almost vanished into silence, and the crew who refused to let them. Back home, the rescued crew returned to quiet lives. One went back to teaching, using their experience to train the next generation of astronauts. Another wrote a book, not about the danger, but about the kindness that saved them. 2 chose to stay out of the spotlight, finding peace in gardens and kitchens and long walks under open skies. The commander, though, kept speaking. Not for fame, but because she believed the real story wasn't about survival. It was about choice. The choice to listen when no one else could hear. The choice to turn toward danger when you could have turned away. Years later, when a research station near the moon lost power during a solar storm, it was a cargo ship from a different nation, once considered a rival, that changed course without being asked. They docked within hours, brought food, oxygen, and a simple message: "We heard you. We came." No one was surprised, because by then the lesson had spread. Space might be vast and empty, but humanity doesn't have to be. The rescue ship that saved Odyssey 7 never got a public name. It returned to its duties, silent and unseen. But those who were on it, both the rescuers and the rescued, knew the truth. That ship wasn't built for war. Not really. In that one moment it became something else, a bridge. A reminder that even in the coldest dark we carry warmth inside us, and sometimes all it takes is one voice saying, "Hold on," and another answering, "I'm coming," to prove that we're never truly alone. Today, when new astronauts train for deep space missions, they don't just learn how to fix oxygen systems or navigate asteroids. They're taught this story, not as legend but as fact, as proof that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to reroute your ship, burn your fuel, and race across millions of kilometers, just because someone asked for help. And in a universe that often feels too big, too cold, too indifferent, that's the most human thing of all.